Hello, everyone. It is time for another Checkly webinar. Today, we will be talking about development teams, about QA teams, about ops teams, about testing, monitoring, and of course, a little bit of Checkly over here. And before we get started, let me just do a little bit of housekeeping. I'm Stefan. I'm part of Checkly's developer relations team, which means that my job is to make developers happy here at Checkly. So I create a lot of content, do YouTube videos, play around, test all our new features. And with me is this gentleman in his lucky shirt. Jonathan, do you quickly want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Canales. I'm a senior solutions engineer here at Checkly. And much like Stefan, I spend quite a bit of time learning the ins and outs of Checkly, but also try to apply that to real world use cases for users and customers so that we know how it works, right? And we can do things like host really awesome webinars where we show you the value of how great this solution is.
For sure. And I'm super excited to have you around, but let me just tell you before we get into the session, the Q&A here in Zoom webinar is enabled. I have it here on my second screen. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A. We try to answer them live, and we also have a little bit of time at the end of the session to go over all the questions. And if you tuned in because you're just interested in testing and monitoring and you haven't used Checkly yet, let me just tell you what Checkly is in a nutshell. So Checkly is a synthetic monitoring platform, and we allow you to monitor your APIs with API checks and your websites and web apps with browser checks powered by Microsoft's stellar testing solution Playwright. So if you want to make sure that all your apps, APIs, and products that are online are working properly around the globe, around the clock, this is what we offer here at Checkly. And we have a long-lasting background in monitoring. But if you're following what we are doing at Checkly, you might have noticed that we're extending a little bit of what we're doing. So since our last launch week, we have a new mantra and a new motto, and this is code, test, and deploy. And this, my friend Jonathan, is exactly what we're going to talk about here today. So we cover that, what that means, and how that can unify monitoring and testing. And if you have any questions after this session, always feel free to drop into our Checkly community Slack. It is available at checklyhq.com/Slack. I promise you, we are a lovely bunch, and we're always happy to help and answer questions and help you ship good stuff with quality. So with that, we made it over the housekeeping. And let's get into the topic and let's talk about testing. And in my experience, testing in larger scale organizations can be a major struggle. And I'm sure and I know that Jonathan has some experience over here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this Spider-Man meme of dev, QA, and ops all pointing at each other really rings true for a lot of what my experience has been working with anything from the small independent developer team all the way to multinational organizations. Like, this is a problem across the board, right? Essentially, you have folks that are in QA testing, you have developers trying to almost do both things at the same time, right? And then you have operations people that are all about site reliability and maintenance and making sure things are staying up. So it creates this natural conflict where we have these competing initiatives, and it can make it so that instead of playing on the same team, it seems like the ball is in someone else's court, they're responsible for it. So maybe it drives this real division, right, and how this sort of work gets done.
Yeah, for sure. And I've also seen that in these kind of situations, it's kind of the teams that work on different things. And you said that it's also the teams that have different goals, right? A QA person really just tries to break my email input validation somehow, right? And wants to guarantee that this works. But in my experience, I do software now for over a decade. It's also a huge question around the tools, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. What a perfect segue. It's like you knew what the next slide was. Um, but yeah, you're speaking to it so beautifully, right? Here you have folks, again on the QA test engineer, more shifted left development side, who have adopted automation testing or running end-to-end test, integration tests, component tests, etc. Maybe they have a test dashboard somewhere. They're getting
Yeah.
all these really great artifacts, right? About, hey, this is what we're shipping to production. This is what we're shipping to our staging environment. This is the health of our application all along the way. And it's like, all of a sudden, right, once you get to production, production becomes some black box that we end up monitoring, right? A whole different team for the most part. Maybe there's some
Yeah.
unification happening if you're at one of the organizations that's realizing this is an issue. And then they have a whole different set of tools, right? It's very rare that test engineers and QA folks are privy to what those tools look like, what they're monitoring. And that's where Checkly comes in, I think. So let's kind of just really quickly highlight exactly what we're talking about here. And I think Spock's very confused face is putting it extremely well, right? You have test engineers, QA folks, developers, they're shifting left, they're trying to practice TDD. We're building quality in sooner within our software development lifecycle. And then you have folks on the opposite automation side as well that are trying to shift right. They're trying to think about production, right, during the whole course of the entire software development lifecycle. But then you have all these competing initiatives and competing separate concerns, right? So you have salespeople that want to make sure that the product is working exactly how it should. They're getting, they're getting some messages from customers when things go down. You have AWS or whatever service that you're relying on. Every now and then there's an outage. You can't help it, but these things happen, right? And for most orgs, I believe people are using staging environments, and we've all been there where we hear, hey, we pushed the code forward, the staging environment's unstable, so we just kind of went for it. These are all problems that we're looking at separately, but really they should all be unified in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So what do you think should people do with all these different concerns and all these different tools?
Oh, man, wow. Yeah, what can we do? It's like someone decided to build a solution literally for this very problem, right? It's literally the reason why I'm here at Checkly, is because they're solving this problem. And this is endemic to the entire tech landscape, right? No one is solving it the way that we are here at Checkly. And we're uniting monitoring and testing through a monitoring as code workflow that Stefan just really laid out earlier, right? Code, test, deploy. Those three things should all be so synonymous with each other and so seamless. And the way that you do it is by adopting a developer-first tool like Checkly. Yeah, it's a pretty good time.
Yeah, we released that at the previous launch week, and we just get it started. So if you want to have a look at this in a nutshell, right, we will show you here right now how a unified tool really can help you to unify these processes and teams, right? With the Checkly CLI, which we will demo in just a moment, monitoring resources, which is our original use case at Checkly, right? We wanted to give you the information to monitor all your apps and websites. You can now put all these definitions in code, but we now leveled it up a little bit so that you can use the same stuff that you already have in place for your monitoring to the testing flow that you have in CI/CD or local testing. And then for you, it's really just a press of a button or running one command to turn the things that you use for monitoring, that you tested, and then you update all your monitoring resources in a single place. So this is the new monitoring as code workflow that we at Checkly provide. And I do think, well, we do believe that this is unifying everything because it's the single tool that gives you the information about testing and monitoring. And I think, shall we get into it, my friend?
Absolutely. The one last thing I want to throw in here is this awesome Vegeta gift, right? So by adopting a tool like Checkly and uniting all these different teams, or even your own small teams initiatives, your power level is going to be over 9,000. You're going to be breaking, scouters left and right. It's going to be a really great way to unlock a lot of efficiency, confidence, and overall quality in the products that you're shipping. But with that being said, we're here to demo things, right?
Let's get into it and let's show the flow.
Awesome. So while we jump into that real quick, 1 second. Boom, boom, boom. Let's actually look at the project that we're going to be demoing, that we're going to be running against today, right? So
what have you been working on?
Yeah. So this is the thing I've been building for the last 2 weeks with some help from ChatGPT. It's a full stack Next.js Next 13 project, right? It has full authorization authentication. You can create users, you can log in, you can do all sorts of cool stuff. It's a bookshop, right? And so being an individual developer on this, on this project that has a front end and a back end, it's been a lot, right? But right now, as you can see, I'm deployed to Vercel. This is a live URL that we're using. Please don't spam it right now because the bill's going to go to me. But what you can see is that you can log in here, right? You can create new users. We'll just do one for fun right now. New user 1 at email.com. And hopefully this isn't anyone's, there we go, 1 second. This isn't anyone's actual email address. If so, very sorry for you. You may get spammed. So we're gonna go ahead and sign up. We get some validation there that was a success, which is always really nice, right? We can look at our accounts. So we got a nice little user profile here. So here's where I'm at, Stefan, right? I've put this thing together, it's deployed. I obviously still have some work to do. This really reminds me of a lot of the use cases that our users encounter, right? They're working with legacy sites. They're actively developing new products that they're trying to iterate through quickly. So what I can already know, right, regardless of what I decide to start working on next, is that there's some critical user flows that I want to make sure are always passing, right? And it just so happens, I think, that the ones that I really want to make sure are always passing are logging in and signing up for a user. What do you think there? Does that sound like a good use case for us to kind of look at together?
That sounds perfect to me. And this also shows like this is a project that you have already been working on, right? But in my experience, usually there are two things that are people considering at the very last moment when it comes to quality, right? So usually when I'm building a project, testing is after I build it already, and then developers already now we have to add some tests, and then moving it to the next stage, monitoring is then even a step further, right? I really like about this that with the monitoring as code workflow is that you can start and set it up right away. Adopt the testing, adopt the monitoring. It's pretty much just one go because it's the same resources. And I totally think that we should have a look at it and get rolling and test and monitor your little next noob thing over here.
Absolutely. This is a really good thing that you called out, because sadly, despite my experience in the testing world, right? What you can see here is that I literally only have one test that's running. Right now, the only dependencies I have related to testing is I've installed Playwright test and I've installed Checkly CLI. That's absolutely it, right? And so what we're going to look at together is the Checkly config, and we're going to walk through how the Checkly config works to make all of this possible behind the scenes, right? Because if you're already familiar, like Stefan said, there's all these hurdles at all these different growth points. Okay, I'm getting started with testing. If I'm using Selenium, it's going to be super complicated. If I'm using some other, more modern frameworks, there's a lot to keep in mind there. Checkly makes it so you don't have to worry about any of that, let alone the synthetic monitoring side. So with that being said, the Checkly global config looks like this, right? We're deciding what the project name is. I'm attributing a logical UID, right? This is what helps Checkly perform its magic behind the scenes. I'm passing in a repo URL in case I want to use that as an environment variable. And then what you see here, right, within this checks object is that I'm saying when I deploy checks, I want them to be active, right? So let's say I was working on checks and my site wasn't in great condition, I could deploy them, but not have them being active. Same thing with muting, right? I could deploy that, but I'm not going to get any alerts if it's failing. They're just going to be running, and I can maybe gather some intelligence about what's going on there. The runtime ID actually, I think, is awesome, because what you see is that Checkly works really beautifully with Playwright. But what we've done is that in our runtimes that we have available for you, you can use other outside dependencies as well that help you take your testing and monitoring game to the next level. And what you also see here is that I've set a frequency for my checks to run every single minute. So once we get to deploying our checks, they're going to be running every single minute, and we're going to be getting a whole lot of feedback very quickly. With locations, as you can see here, I'm passing an array of different AWS locations where my checks will be running from. So something really great to keep in mind, and again, this is like a part of all the really cool stuff that we're doing for you. We're running these checks in production or in staging or against your private location, right? With our infrastructure. You don't have to figure any of that stuff out. We're doing it for you. That's huge. And so you'll also see here, I'm passing an array of tags, because for me, when I'm using the Checkly app, right, I like being able to filter between my runs and my check groups, what's going on, right? So these tags are going to apply globally to anything that we deploy today. And it's really awesome. Alert channels, we're not using any here, but alert channels with Checkly are, SMS, Ops Genie, Slack, email, custom webhooks. There are so many. I can't list them all right now because that would be a whole other webinar. So what you see here are check matches and test matches, and I'm using wildcards. What we're really saying to Checkly right now is, if you see any files that match this glob pattern, right, let's go ahead and run them. Let's go ahead and deploy them. So however it is, you've already set up your tests, right? Wherever you're testing, Checkly works with you and how you've set up your custom project. And it's just out of the box awesome. I'm doing the same thing for browser checks. This will come up in a moment. And then the CLI run location, right, is US East. So that's awesome. I covered a whole lot. So is there anything that I missed, Stefan?
No, I think this is perfect. So I think the takeaways here are pretty much that in the package JSON, we have the Checkly CLI as a development dependencies. And from there on, you can start using and adopting the workflow that feels like you're testing your applications locally, but actually it is running in our infrastructure, as Jonathan said. It is running US East 1, USS1 in the future for your monitoring. And then the important piece here is that from line 8 to line 22, this is all same defaults for all your future tests and monitors. You can configure all your API and browser checks on a single check, group, or global level or project level, like it is like here. And then the beauty about this is you can adopt and start putting these into your code base, right? These glob patterns enable you to put your API monitoring next to the controller that is actually defining the API endpoint, or you can put it next to your login code that handles the login stuff. This brings up a lot of flexibility, and the monitoring as code workflow enables you to tailor your setup to your project and not the other way around, right? We are flexible, our Checkly is flexible to make it fit whatever you need. But I do think that we should just show how this actually works. So this is a general Checkly configuration. Should we just run it, Jonathan?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go ahead and clear my my logs here. There we go. Yeah, so essentially right now, let's go ahead and test what we have. Like I shared, I have one check that currently exists. We'll skip over this group thing. Essentially, that's just another kind of more focused config for a group of checks. But this is the check that we're going to be running. It's an API check, right? So let's go ahead and pass npx checkly test and see what happens here. So immediately, right? That was so
nicely fast. Snappy. Isn't nicely snappy?
So fast, right? So immediately we get almost instantaneous feedback. That just blew my mind how quick that was. I've been doing this all day. I've been doing this for months now, and it still doesn't get old, but it's passing, right? It's passing. This API check that I have that we have in our repository right now, and all we did was say npx checkly test. We passed that over to Checkly, and everything's running. And the way that I was able to do this, right? There's a little bit behind this magic, and that's just I'm logged in. I'm logged into Checkly. That's all it took, right? Like that's literally the magic. You can also create a Checkly account through the CLI, right? So if you're just getting started, you don't want to have anything to do with the UI. There's gonna be a little bit you have to do with the UI when you sign up, but it's so straightforward. This is awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
I think, go for it.
Let's have a quick look at the file though. So what you see there is that we have a check.ts file, and the Checkly CLI provides you something that we call constructs that are on the top of the file. So every resource that you have in Checkly can be created by initializing some JavaScript and TypeScript objects. So you see that check groups, API checks, alert channels, browser checks. It is all included in JavaScript and TypeScript, and then you can plug away and can structure the code to your needs. You can connect resources. So you see there that we just have a few new calls in line 12 for a group. Then we have the API check a little bit below that. This is how we see monitoring as code evolving. And this is the approach to put your monitoring and testing setup into your code base for a nice government, so that you can control everything super, super nicely. But I think you already showed this critical user flow, right? Should we take a step at that?
Absolutely. Before we do that, I do want to invite any of the users currently in the in the Zoom webinar right now. If you have any questions, you should be able to see like a little box that says QA. Feel free to ask questions in there. We're definitely going to have time at the end of the webinar to answer any of your questions. If they're particularly spicy about test automation or monitoring, we very much welcome that. But yeah, Stefan, you're absolutely right. Let's go ahead and figure that out. I have this critical path tests folder. Let's go ahead and just do something like login.spec.ts, yeah? And we could come in here and import Playwright and all that kind of jazz, but you know what we're gonna do? It's like one of my favorite things to do is use npx Playwright CodeGen. So for folks that aren't familiar with Playwright, maybe they're wanting to adopt a new, fast, real snappy testing framework that's also super stable, right? Playwright comes with the ability to generate tests just by entering npx Playwright CodeGen. So what you see here, one second, and I'm actually going to find the URL for my project, and then we'll drop it in there. One second, y'all. Dun, dun, dun. Of course, I thought I had it open somewhere. There we go. Cool. 1 second. My apologies. Boom. Cool. So what you see here, right, on the right-hand side is that for any actions I take within this browser that has just been spawned when we said npx Playwright code, npx Playwright CodeGen, as soon as I visited a URL, as soon as I click on something, all of those actions are going to be recorded over here in the Playwright inspector. And I'll be able to copy this entire list of actions and go ahead and use that as a test. So without further ado, we know what we're looking to do. We're going to click login, right? You can already see it's showing us exactly how we're finding that element on the screen. Super powerful. I think it was new user 1 at email.com, and the password is super secure, right? So let's go ahead and log in here. And then we get this validation. I'm just going to go ahead and click that, right? So here, in a matter of seconds, we've created what is not the most beautiful test, but this test will do exactly what we want it to do. Let's go ahead and grab this. I'm copying this. I'm going to double check that I copied it. I'm going to go ahead and end this right now. We're just going to paste this in here. And then what we can do, right? Now that we have this running, I seem to remember that we had that config file set up earlier, and I think it already does some magic. Should I see if it just works out of the box?
I think you should just give that a try.
Okay, let's do npx checkly test and see what happens here. It looks like yes, it looks like it was picked up immediately, right? I didn't have to configure anything. I don't have to do anything. There's just that initial config file. It already knows what sort of specs to look for. It already knows to run them. And would you look at that? The test is passing locally. It's not even passing locally. It's running in production. Again, we're using our infrastructure. We're pointing at the actual prod environment, and it's passing. This is huge.
Yeah, I agree. So what you usually, so let's unpack a few things here for the people that are maybe not familiar with Playwright. So even though the process is usually that you use CodeGen, and Playwright records all the actions that you take in the CodeGen window, right? But what a lot of people that haven't used Playwright before is that all these, what is it, 7 or 8 instruction there are actually not only action takers. So what these also do is they're waiting for a certain element to become visible, to be stable. So what you can do is, so in line 11, what happens there is that Jonathan clicked a heading, and if this heading wouldn't show up for a certain reason, this would just fail. So we really would have here a working test case that fails when the DOM doesn't reach the structure that we are looking for. But let me answer a question from the QA. So Shri, I hope I said that right. So they ask about fixtures and page object models in Playwright and Checkly. These should work. We bundle your Playwright tests for you. So you can import, you can restructure your code, that works. And when it comes to visual testing and visual regression testing with Playwright, we don't support that yet because it's we have to look into this. For this request, it would be great to file or upvote an entry in our public roadmap. And then we have Daniel, who had the question if there's a recommendation for using Checkly to test local applications and APIs. We've heard this request a few times. We're looking into this. We don't have a solution yet. Similar thing there. Some ideas on how you could see this workflow being possible in your development workflow in the public roadmap would be great. We're aware that a lot of people want to do this, so we may have a look at that in the future. For these kind of for questions though, checklyhq.com/Slack. The product team, Jonathan and I, hang out there quite a little bit. So if you want to discuss how to implement something or have feature requests, this is the perfect place. So now I derailed it a little bit for the QA, but keep the questions coming. I love this stuff. So what we achieved now is we automatically picked up a spec file. We have an API check defined. What should I do that? And we tested, let's say we tested our preview deployment that is online somewhere. What would be the next step?
You know, I think there's a few different spaces we could go, right? So we know that we can test here. We know that this is running in production. We can run this in production. So now, kind of like what we've shared, this site is up, this site is deployed. I want to know that as I continue to do, my work in updating the site, that if I change anything, or if the environment that's hosting it is going down, which I don't think it is because it's for sale, I want to know immediately, right? So let's go ahead and deploy, right? Let's go ahead and actually cross that boundary between testing and monitoring right now and go ahead and deploy these checks to Checkly. So it's asking me, hey, do you want to deploy this project to your account? And the answer is absolutely yes. And that's it, right?
Nice.
That's it. So what we're going to look at right now is I haven't refreshed the page. Let's see what we got. The moment of truth. Here it is, right? So in those 2 commands, I was able to verify that, hey, this test that I wrote for my application, Does it run? Can it run in production? Can it actually do what it's supposed to do? And then all I did was type a different command with just a separate ending. And now we have this login spec.ts and this API check running at the same time. So I think what we're going to do next is take a look at the API check results, right?
Yeah, I think the key differentiator here is this is now dashboards running over time, right? And Jonathan will show you what data we gather for you for API checks in just a moment. But regarding the local host question, rightfully pointed, we don't support that yet, but there's always the possibility that you use ngrok or a similar tunnel tool to enable the Checkly test workflow for your local development flow. Show me what you got.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm loving these questions coming in. I'm super excited for the end of the webinar for this. So what we're looking at right now, right, is that exact same API test and check that we saw earlier, but we're looking at the actual check itself through our UI, right? So we can see what the monitoring results are. Our availability, our uptime over the course of the last 2 minutes is 100%, right? And this check is going to actually run every single minute. So we're going to have really great data and insight into how this very critical API check is performing. And again, right, we get a better idea about overall performance over time. We get the location that we're running from. If we have multiple locations, as you can see here, we have multiple locations that we've selected. We're actually cycling through those in a round robin fashion. So we're going from North Virginia to Ireland, you know, in a snap of a finger. But yeah, you get this really great information. So if your services, right, if this API starts going down or degrading over time, you'll literally see that in this chart, right? And you're going to have all this really great information about how things are going. So for me, when you make a request to, you know, this books route, essentially, I want to know that my users can go ahead and get this information. We'll look at assertions and limits together. I want to know that the books are all coming back in something like under a second or under 5 seconds, right? What's really cool about Checkly is that even if I didn't set the response time assertion here, you can set degraded demarcations or statuses, right? So if it starts taking over 5 seconds, maybe we'll say 2 seconds, I want to mark this as degraded. And that'll let me know in the UI, hey, you should start paying attention. This thing may be on its way to failing. And I can also just set some hard limits around, hey, you know what? If it's after 10 seconds, it's failed. If it's after 5 seconds, it's failed. Someone needs to pay attention. This is really great. Again, anything you can do in the UI, it's one-to-one parity with what you can do in the CLI.
Yeah, I think this is the key piece, right? This is where we started off at Checkly, but now we're moving everything to the monitoring as code workflow. All the options here in the edit screen are configurable, and they go where they actually should be, right? You don't want to control things via UI that are testing things that are coming from code. So this is a nice way to put everything into your repository where it belongs. Daniel had a quick question. If we at Checkly have plans to add support for native mobile end-to-end testing, I don't think so. But yeah, I don't think so. But a roadmap entry is always welcome. But I think it's probably a little bit of a stretch for us right now. Cool. Coming back.
Cool.
We also have a second check. Yeah.
We do. Absolutely, we do. Go ahead and leave this really quick, and I'll actually handle the question from Sarah in this next one as well. So what we're looking at together now is that login spec that we just created with Playwright CodeGen in less than 30 seconds, right? And so now, because our frequency is set at every 1 minute through the CLI, we're getting really great, again, really great insight into the overall performance of our web application, right? So you can see here that there's a little bit of increased time it takes for most of the, most of the content to be fully loaded. You can see the actual loading time, right? So as your browser is firing off things like the DOM content loaded events and things like that, you can see what the differences are over time. And this is something that you're not going to get with a testing dashboard somewhere else, right? You're just not going to get this information. Number one, you're going to need to set up, and I think I'm setting myself up to answer this question. You're going to need to set up some sort of cron job. You have to figure out all this configuration. But if you remember, I'm just going to take a super quick move back over here. If you remember, we actually handled that here. And technically, if you're working with a team, or maybe you have a group of checks that you want to run at a different frequency, you can also change that at the group level. But just to take it a step further, you could technically also change that at the individual spec level, at the individual check level. So all the way through, you have access to be able to run your checks, whether they're API or browser, how you want, when you want, where you want, and it's all done through a developer first workflow. If you want to investigate it through the UI, you absolutely can, but this is great. Sorry, I always get a little dumbfounded when I'm talking about Checkly, and it still just, it hasn't lost its ability to do that to me. It's wild.
I do agree though, right? Especially when you look at metrics over time, these kind of things sneak in, right? It's your API endpoint that every addition, every tweak gets a little bit slower. It's your website that every little deploy adds a little bit up. And then it's the question, hey, when did that start happen? And where are we actually coming from? I think it's tremendously valuable to have progression of certain, as you have it, critical user flows and the APIs over time, because it just tells you, hey, we messed it up on April 11, and it's good to know this, right?
It seems really valuable to know when things started going very wrong, right? The one thing that I forgot to attend to that you'll see with your browser checks is that you can actually see the errors, network errors, the console errors, etc., that your application is feeding to you as you're monitoring these critical user flows. So again, just like you're saying, right, you are starting to build all this really great insight of like, hey, did you see when all those errors started spiking and now the site is down? It's like those things go together or something. It's pretty wild. Maybe, right. Okay, cool. So I think we've looked at these results. Let's see something though, right? I think
want to do some Q&A first. So we have Albert asking, is there a possibility to run tests only on deployment and not over time? With the Checkly monitoring as code workflow, run Checkly tests and don't deploy it. So you can adopt that workflow if you want to. And then we had another one, something. Enrique asked, what's the best way to use and set environment variables in Checkly and Playwright? You can have a look on GitHub at GitHub Checkly CLI. We have an advanced project in there that handles environment variables, and you can pass particularly environment variables via the command line if you structure your tests that way. Should we break something?
Yeah, I think we should break something. And then Michael,
good transitions here from me.
Should we break something? It's Thursday. Let's break something. Okay, cool. So here we go. Let's break something. Let's do this. We'll just add a few S's to this. My fingers slipped, Stefan. You know, sometimes it happens to the best of us. You know, let's see. What are we gonna do here? Do we just want to test it, or do we want to see if maybe Checkly has something else up its sleeve? What do you think?
Well, I think we should first test it, and then we should roll up our sleeves and then whale it.
Okay, cool. So we're gonna test it and make sure it breaks first, because you know Stefan's keeping me very honest here. We should verify that it's broken before we do this next step in. We're already seeing it hang. Remember how snappy it was when it passed? Oh man, it's like we have to wait until the testing failure timeout happens, right? So Playwright, like Stefan was saying earlier, it's still looking for this element, right? It's still looking for this thing. And then once it says, hey, you know what? Can't find it. we're going to go ahead and get that feedback here. So that's the only thing we're waiting for, is Playwright is doing its magic.
Yeah, so this comes, this is built into, this is called auto waiting. So whenever you want to do an action, it will wait for it and it's timing out. So we have now a passing check, but look at this, right? There's also some stuff that we now could look at.
Yep. Do we want to look at the trace right now and see what Playwright is giving us and what Checkly is handing to us, right?
Yep.
Let's go ahead and pull that up over here. Oh, there we go.
What is this magic, my friend?
Oh man. So here you go, right? What we're seeing right now is a Playwright trace. This is, let me put it a different way. Playwright right now is the only framework where you're getting traces out of the box for free all the time, super snappy, doesn't take up a lot of resources in CI, and also, you know, you get free parallelization. Playwright's awesome. Anyway, what you see here is right here at the bottom. You can have access to the console, you have access to the network, and then also as you're navigating, right, your commands, and I'm gonna go ahead and make my screen bigger. Sorry about that, y'all. As you're navigating your commands, as I'm stepping over everything that's happening, if I click action, you can actually see, let's see, if it's a click action, you can actually see where
so cool. I'm
making that
still
action.
super into this. I like to call it time travel debugging, right? It's like whatever happened in your CI/CD pipeline or wherever you run your tests, you can access what's up.
Absolutely. And then you also have access to, you know, doing before and after screenshots. So let's say we clicked on email and then all of a sudden everything turned sideways. We'd be able to visually see what's going on there. And of course, you have access to the video if you like that. I think the trace is where it's at because you have access to all of this really great feedback, right? Like right now, I can see that this 401 request, essentially the post request to log in was denied, right? Like it's not happening. We're not getting that validation back and we're not seeing anything pop up like we saw before when we successfully logged in. So that lets us know why this test failed, right? Something about our authentication did not go well. Looks like in the console, we get this nice console error. Oh man, it's like I left myself breadcrumbs to know what was going wrong, right? Like we all do. So we verified that it's broken, Stefan. What do we want to do next?
Well, I think you can fire up the command that you already wanted to fire up, and I do a few questions over here. So Michael is asking how to test APIs that are in a protected network. So at Checkly, we provide something that is called the private locations, so the Checkly agents. So if you have something that is not necessarily accessible on the public internet, you can spin up a Docker container that communicates with the Checkly infrastructure, and you can monitor your internal stuff like that one too. And then we have Roman, who is asking if there is a way to display diffs with the Checkly CLI similar to the Terraform plan. So Jonathan is just picking up something, but we do have a first step on diffing on things that are deployed. We will show you that in a second.
That's fair. I'm happy to do that now. Obviously, you know I love recording things. Yeah, what we're seeing here is that we've actually run this command npx checkly -- record. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna see, right, the whole idea here. Let's just take a few steps back to the very beginning when we were much younger men, excited about uniting testing and monitoring. That's what we're doing. We literally just passed npx checkly test -- record, and now look at us, right? That same spec file, we know it took 41 seconds to fail. I can click it. And you remember those traces we were just nerding out about? It's available to us, right? So all of those really great artifacts and information that are gonna help us figure out what went wrong, how to resolve it, and right, a really nice sort of URL I can just drop in Slack, Microsoft Teams, and let people know like, hey, something's gone terribly wrong, let's figure this out. This is it, right? This is literally what's going on. So bear with me for a moment because remember the time that we were monitoring our application's login feature every single minute? Now, all of a sudden, because our testing dashboard, right, that we're using with Checkly is right next to where we're actually monitoring our critical user flows and all the API routes that we care about, which is all of them, to be frank. It's all connected. So I don't have to go to another solution somewhere else that, I'm not familiar with. We'll be able to put all these things together to resolve issues as a team. And so for people that are, independent developers, leads, managers, directors, VPs of engineering, this is the sort of thing that you need to really just start pressing forward and increasing confidence, right?
Yeah, I think this is also what kind of really really excites me about this. So when you're considering that I'm now testing my APIs or I'm testing my end-to-end browser, I'm setting these up, right? I'm 100% in the context of things that go wrong, right? I'm like, oh yeah, I messed that up. Maybe my test is wrong here. Maybe I have to tweak these kind of things. This scenario is entirely different if your production deployment fails and you're maybe not on the team. Or if I get an alert, I get out of bed, get in front of the computer to figure out, okay, why did that fail? So with these two things, right, with monitoring, you get all the results at your fingertips. And with this combination, if your deployments are recording the results, if I get a faulty monitoring error, right, something is going on in production, and I go to the deployments and I see all green in all the deployments, then I can almost be sure, well, the project or the problem is not the code that we deployed, but rather maybe a third-party dependency that is struggling or having a downtime. These two screens really help you to figure out, hey, what is the problem? What passed? And where did things go wrong here?
Absolutely. I think the one thing I want to drill down on, like in this moment, right, is we've all heard it. Almost, it's the story as old as time. We have some unreliable, unstable staging environment that all of our code needs to pass through before it gets to production. And, we all hate it, but it's just a matter of what it is, right? It just doesn't have as many resources. We're resetting it every 4 hours or whatever it is. Here's the thing. If you're monitoring that staging environment, right? Let's say I had a check group of staging environment checks, and it starts failing, or we're seeing some degraded API checks, just like exactly what Stefan's saying. When I'm pushing code and that code is failing, I can immediately know at the same time, because we're actually sharing that information with you here, right? I can immediately know, hey, at that time, how was that environment doing? Is this code the problem, or is the environment a problem? And we've solved that, right? There's no more guesswork. There's no more lost confidence there. And I think that's so huge.
Yeah, 100%. Let's cover up some more questions. So can you go to your terminal? Let's show the diffing. So of the deployment.
Cool.
So,
cool. 1 second.
So the way that Checkly constructs work is that every construct, so you remember we did new API check, new alert group, everything has a local logical ID, and we keep track of these kind of things. So as a first step, what we did with the Checkly CLI is if you create or add or update a new check, we will group these on a file level and to show you, hey, you are about to deploy this new check now when you run deploy, or this will be updated. We briefly looked into real file diffing. I would have to double check the current state of that. So this is on the radar, that having a diff on the check level would be nice, but I would have to double check that. Feel free to reach out in Slack if you want to have more questions around this. Then James asked, is it possible to record the tracing video only on fail tests? Let's have a look at the overview. Is the trace always there?
I think it is. 1 second. You mean the overview within the application itself? Yeah.
Yeah. Do these have the green ones here? Do they have traces?
I believe so. Let's see. I think I know. Let's see. There won't be a trace for a browser check. There might. Oh, my bad, for an API check. There should be one for here though. Let's see. Yeah. Here we go. Yeah. So I think I know where this question is coming from, and forgive me if I'm getting this wrong. So oftentimes, right, I came from another testing framework. I won't name it, but it's another modern testing framework. Oftentimes people would disable the video so they could save CPU processing power. Here with Checkly, and I just want to double down on this, we're using our infrastructure. So when we're recording the traces and when we're recording the videos, that's at no compute cost to you, right? That's not something you have to be mindful of when running in CI. That's something that we're handling on our side. So while they're available, it comes as no cost to your overall developer experience for using the platform. So great question.
Well said, my friend. And then we have the last question for today, which is Danielle. Does Checkly integrate with all major cloud providers? It's a CLI workflow, right? So whatever you use to deploy your stuff, the way that you usually use it, you have you deploy your new APIs, your new applications. Somewhere probably is an environment variable telling you what you just deployed. Adopt a CLI first workflow, pick up the environment variable, use Checkly tests to test this preview, staging, production environment. You will find some GitHub Actions workflows in our documentation. But yeah, it's at the end, it's NPM, nodes, and a little bit of shell scripting and failing and passing during your deployments. Woo! Dude, awesome. Did we cover everything? That was a little ride here.
Yeah, I think we covered everything. Let's get out of demo mode. Yeah, let's go ahead and do the outro. So feel free to take it away.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, for live demoing that. So I hope that became clear that with Checkly, we're really going for monitoring as code. Everything should live in code. Your monitoring resources, let it be alert channels, API checks, browser checks, groups, whatever new check types might be on the radar for the future, they will live in code so that you can define your monitoring and testing setup next to your actual application code where it belongs. Then if you're deploying to production, use npx Checkly tests to make sure that your preview deployments, your production deployments, dude, go one back.
Sorry, man.
Run npx Checkly test to make sure that your preview deployments and staging deployments work, and then reuse the same code with a single command to turn your testing workflow to use what you just put in place to check your preview or production deployments to enable monitoring with the snap of a finger. If you want to get started, we already worked off an existing project. So you've seen we had a Checkly config in place. If you want to get started from scratch, npm create Checkly CLI is the command to go. You have two options there to bootstrap a basic or advanced project. The advanced project handles environment variables, has a few examples in there, defaults. So if you want to really have a look, you can also go to the GitHub repository, which is github.com/checkly-CLI. And with that, if you have any further questions, Jonathan and I will hang out in the community Slack right after for a little bit. So come and join the party at checklyhq.com/Slack. We are a lovely bunch. And with that, I saw two more questions popping up and we are almost at time. So let's have a look. So anonymous attendee asks, for CI/CD integration, would you recommend Vercel integration over or GitHub deployment integration? As far as I know, great question. You want to take it or shall I?
I'll give it a shot. I mean, this was the first time I've used Vercel and I've ever created a next project. I was pretty astounded at how just user developer friendly it was just to get up and running super quickly and deploy. I think it was great. I haven't had like more recent experience with what GitHub pages or GitHub deployment looks like more recently, but I would say Vercel is pretty awesome. It's super smooth. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
For sure. I think the person is more asking about the existing Vercel integration. So we have the Vercel integration in place. We are working with Vercel to enable the new monitoring as code workflows. So if you want to adopt the Checkly test and Checkly deploy commands. You can pair it with GitHub Actions and start deploying and testing and monitoring this way. We're working with Vercel to combine this. And then we have another one. How does this interact with your GitLab integration? Do we have a GitLab integration? I would have to double check that. So I would have to come back on that unless Jonathan has an answer here.
Yeah, I'm literally looking it up right now. Let me see. Do we have a GitLab integration? I'm not seeing one. I feel silly for not just being able to say yes or no very clearly right now. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything. Feel free to join.
Yeah, feel free to join the community Slack. We also took note on of all the questions that were in the chat. So when we send out the summary email of this webinar for the questions that we didn't answer live, we will catch up and will provide the necessary information so that we don't leave anyone hanging. So my friend, I think to-do list is empty. We made it.
Awesome. Awesome. This was super fun. Thank you for being with me on what has been a very fun, like 2-week journey preparing for this webinar. This has been really great. A lot of ups and downs. I'm going to write a short novel about this afterwards. But yeah, it's awesome. Super happy to demonstrate this. I'll see you in the chat.
Exactly. Thanks everybody for watching. We've been Jonathan and Stefan from Checkly, and I will press the stop webinar button. We all see each other in the internet and in the Checkly community Slack. Have a great Thursday, everybody.